Hi everyone. We're going to start at 3. I'm just posting a comment of who we are. Uh, and then I'll go look for Gary, our guest today, Gary Goodacre. And I'm just about to pin a comment. Your NGC. Okay. Now let's go. There he is. Hi, Gary.
Hi.
Hi. Okay. We're just good to see you.
Nice to see you.
We're just have about a minute, so I think everybody's sort of jockeying. It's this moment before the Instagram Live starts where people are coming in and going out. So welcome to everybody who's joining. We'll go in about a minute. So how was your day, Gary, so far?
It's been good. Yeah, the weather hasn't been too bad, and I've been able to kind of get outside a little bit, so I
Yes,
can't
this
complain.
this mild break has been all right, I think. Although, yeah, it's a bit of a relief, anyways. There we are. So it's 3 o'clock. So why don't we get going? Thanks, Gary. We'll get to introductions in a minute. Thanks everyone for being here. I'm Jonathan Shaughnessy, Associate Curator of Contemporary Art at the National Gallery of Canada, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this week's edition of House Blend, a show that happens every second week on Instagram Live now, where gallery curators engage with colleagues at the gallery, sometimes outside of the gallery. And today we have Gary Goodacre, our Chief of Education and Public Programs at the gallery. Just a few housekeeping notes. On est ici toujours à 13 heures en français, les jeudis, à chaque deuxième jeudi, 3 o'clock in English. Just in time for your coffee break, if you so choose. I have some tea going right now.
Mm,
And Gary, I hope you're likewise refreshed.
I've got coffee, yeah.
Very good, very good. Yeah, so we'll go about a half an hour, 20 minutes to 30 minutes. If there are questions at the end, please feel free to put them in the comments, and we'll get to that. And yeah, I think that's it. I just wanted to start, as I do every time, with some acknowledgements. And the first of which is that I don't know where everybody is in the world on this virtual space of Instagram Live. I myself am in Ottawa, the Ottawa-Gatineau region, as is the National Gallery of Canada, which is located on unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. And I myself am born in Ottawa. I left Ottawa after school and have found myself coming back. So as a longtime resident of Ottawa and as a white settler Canadian of British and Irish ancestry through my father, I like to always acknowledge the land that we are on here and the keepers of this land since time immemorial. And I also think it's important to situate our relationship to it in that way. I also, at the same time, want to acknowledge the presence of Indigenous communities in Ottawa who've made Ottawa home, be it First Nations, Métis, and quite a large Inuit community, of course, in our region. So welcome everybody, and welcome Gary. We thought that this week, what would be interesting, because the National Gallery opened last weekend, and in thinking about that, the last House Blend, we talked to Junia Georgi, our Chief of Design, about some of the steps that were in place to reopen the gallery. What were the safety measures? What are we doing to ensure that visitors feel safe and secure and have an agreeable visit? And this week, the thought was, Gary, that we would look at education and how I think when people think of the gallery, hands-on education, not hands-on the art, but hands-on activities that you can do, and Artissimo and these kinds of programs may look a bit differently now that we have put, in our life after COVID, or life living with COVID, I guess is where we're at now. So I wanted to kind of get to that, and we will get to that. But to begin with, I thought, Gary, maybe, I don't know if you were there this weekend, but before we get into your background, could you give us some thought of how it went this weekend? And I think it was a good turnout.
Yeah, we had a really good turnout for the member preview days and then for the days when we were open to the public. I know that the capacity is, I think, about 1,000 people a day. And we reached that capacity both Saturday and Sunday, which is really nice. It's just really great that people came out and visited the gallery. It was free admission, thanks to Black and McDonald. And we ran family programming. We have retooled family programming. We can talk about that later. But I know that we had a really good turnout for that as well. And the interpreters who delivered the program were really happy to see some familiar faces, but also new faces. So all in all, I think quite a successful first week.
Great, and that new faces is important because I think through Black and Mac, the free opening weekend, it has seemed from our visitor services colleagues asking also, because the gallery is always curious who has been here before, who maybe hasn't. What are those barriers to access and entry is a big question always, certainly now, something we might get into. But I know that being free does suddenly, the gallery may be a place that you can kind of come and explore if you haven't thought of doing so. And on that note, thanks to the National Gallery Foundation, it's been announced that the gallery will be free now for the first 25,000 visitors. I'm curious how long that means, but I think that the opening weekend was quite exceptional. So I think it can mean that for at least the coming weeks, there's certainly going to be free admission for those who make the trip. So that's exciting news. And also today, on the 23rd, it's the first opening day, reopening of Abedakwene. So the major exhibition of global Indigenous art that the gallery, really one of the strong points of the gallery's program is its work in these exhibitions that bring together Indigenous voices from around the world, first with Sagahan in 2013, now with Abedakwene in 2020. So that reopened today. It took an extra week just to get everything prepped and ready in the galleries, and now that's set to go. So Thursdays to Sunday, everyone who is in Ottawa will have the chance to visit that. So now, Gary, I wanted to get to your background because part of the House Blend program is for the public, certainly when the gallery was closed, to come to know the voices and the faces behind the gallery a little bit better, who we may not see every day. And I've worked with you for quite some time now. You're the Chief of Education and Public Programs. How did you get to your role? For those who may be interested in what education means at the museum and how you get into that program, what would you say? How did you get here?
Well, I kind of like to joke that I sort of fell into my career by accident. I actually, my ambition when I was a student in university was to be a high school art teacher, mainly because I knew I wanted to teach, and I liked art, and it's kind of like the one career I knew about. In museums, really the only career I sort of was aware of at the time, and this would have been like 30 years ago, was curator. So I went to Ottawa U. I did a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. I then taught a little bit at the Ottawa School of Art and decided to go to Queen's, and I did a Bachelor of Education, all with the aim of being a teacher in the school system. And around that same time, I just ended up working at a part-time job at the Museum of Science and Technology as a host, which is kind of like an interpreter role, or part guard, part interpreter, where one of my main duties was just doing ad hoc interpretation on the floor, and I really enjoyed it. And it's kind of when I first discovered the whole idea of learning in a leisure setting, and learning in a setting outside of the formal school system, and I really liked it. And I ended up staying at Science and Tech once I got my teaching degree and moving over to the Aviation Museum, where my role was to develop community programming, outreach programming that would use the arts to draw in different audiences, new audiences who maybe weren't, so familiar with aviation and aviation history, and kind of bringing them in, and really enjoyed that. And after a few years, thought, well, I really would kind of like to work at an art gallery, given that that's my background and my passion. And at the time, I was still making art, and I thought I just wanted to be at an art gallery. So I went to Concordia and did my master's degree in art education with a focus in in museum education.
A shout out to Concordia there. I'm also an alum. Did my
Yeah,
BFA Art History at Concordia. So
yeah.
there, yeah.
It was a really good experience, and it's kind of, it sounds silly, but it's kind of pretty late, in my kind of schooling. And even though I had been working for a while, that was when I kind of really came to understand that interpretations of artworks are provisional. People can, they create their own meaning. Really the focus of my studies there was how do non-expert viewers use dialogue and discussion to create and make meaning together? So how do you get
Hmm.
people who don't really know much about contemporary art, who might even kind of find it difficult? How do you kind of bring them together, and just through conversation with peers, not necessarily with experts? How can they interpret works, and how far can they go? And that's where I really learned that people really have the skills and the abilities to do that. Really, it's just a matter of getting people comfortable doing that.
Right. You were saying, I think, that in your experience, younger, it's up to a certain age group, maybe even before double digits. Kids are quite willing to share, to say what they think right off the bat about something. But then at a certain time, you find that people get quite self-conscious as a rule and think they need to know something before they can actually speak about it.
Yeah.
I know you brought that up in our French discussion.
I know anyone who's given a tour at a gallery or seen groups of kids. I mean, it's just amazing to see, the grade twos come to the gallery, and, they walk up the colonnade, which is that big ramp to the great hall. They're literally doing like the oohing and the eyeing, and they're kind of reacting the way I've heard the architect Moshe Safdie talk about how he would like people to sort of respond as they walk through the spaces. But something happens, and around grade 6, grade 7, I mean, we've all been there. We become a bit self-conscious and afraid of sharing. And I think that, people develop the idea that you have to be an expert to interpret art. And if you don't come with a background in art history, and particularly if you're confronting works of art that don't have an easy point of entry, if they're not narrative artworks that, tell a story,
Mm-hmm.
they don't know where to begin. And so they just assume that there isn't a starting point to interpret. And so our job is to kind of help them find those ways in.
Yeah, yeah, and certainly I know, I mean, it's almost, yeah, I mean, the reactions I find as a contemporary art curator, there may be an assumption too, and I talk about this all the time when I'm talking with people about what I do, and the idea that, I walk into a gallery and everything I understand because I work in the field of contemporary art, which could not be farther from the truth. I mean, I'm flummoxed often, if that's the word, by things that I see, may not understand at first, things that I need to come back to and maybe ask questions about. And I think it's this level, and I've also read that often fear, if you don't understand something or there's some fear, can lead to often aggression and anger. We know that in many contexts. And I think something can happen also with the artwork where just to let that down a bit and say there's nothing confrontational here, there's nothing, we just need to kind of get to know one another, and then maybe it can ensue. And I'm wondering, I think about that in general, but my work as a curator is to work with artists in terms of their vision within context in the gallery, and put on exhibitions and displays which will, make links between works, but really from what the works are about. And I'm really interested, Gary, because I think the mandate of your department and education can sometimes not run counter to that, but can be more about the visitor and maybe a little bit less about intention. And I wonder if you could speak to that a bit in general, about your experience with the philosophies of your field, the theories, and how maybe this kind of visitor-centric, might be a bit different than what, as a curator, I'm used to thinking about. Well, this is what the artist is intending, and I'm going to help to realize that intention as best I can and offer my take on it, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly the intention of the artist is important, and I think a lot of visitors who come really are genuinely curious about the intention of the artist, and
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't have to be the beginning point. And so, I would say that our role as educators is to kind of facilitate experiences and to kind of help people understand that, the starting point really can be your experience and your reaction to a work. Um, how do I feel, or when I see this, And are there any links to my lived experience that I can make, or are there none? What do I see in front of me? Like, what materials has the artist used? How are things put together? And, simply by sort of just looking and describing what you see, analyzing how things are put together, you can begin to sort of interpret, if not the intentions of the artist, how you're reading the work, or if there are, or what questions are coming up for you, and even just revealing your own ideas about art, or what art should be. If you're not responding to something, is it because it isn't representational, it isn't narrative? There are a lot of learning theories about developmental learning theories, where people sort of move through a progression, where if you're a novice viewer, you will read into even abstract works where there is no narrative. You will read a story into that, and then as people kind of become more familiar and used to looking at art, they're just more comfortable with the idea that your interpretation of a work of art is provisional and can change over time. And an artwork can become an old friend that you read in new and different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And then, if you visit maybe with a friend or with a group of people or with strangers, and you have a conversation, you could talk about your responses to a work of art, and then maybe see how someone else sees it and see things in a new way. And maybe then you read the label, or you get more information about the artist. And in this age of instant access to information on the internet, I realize that evaluating and assessing the quality of the information is one thing, but it is easy to get information quite quickly. You can find out more, but it's good if we start from the viewer, so that their response, their questions are what gets answered. And I know that there are many educators whose approach is really simply, when they give a tour, and it could be quite uncomfortable, to just say, okay, well, I'm here to answer whatever questions you have, and then you just wait, and you wait for a few minutes until someone asks a question.
The brave soul.
And then you do your best to answer. That puts a lot of pressure on the person who's leading the program, because you do have to have a lot of knowledge about the work, the context in which it was produced. But the strategies that we tend to use are really about getting people to just first describe and analyze what they're seeing, and then to interpret it, and then through discussion, take other people's ideas and information and perspectives into consideration, and maybe collaboratively kind of build a possible interpretation. And when I do that myself with younger children, it often ends there. With adults, I think that they are, and this is a big generalization, they usually are really curious, and but what are the intentions, and they want to know, like, well, what was the context in which this artwork was produced. And I think that's a really important dimension of the work. But it's just, I would say it's a dimension, and there are many other sort of dimensions and ways in.
Yeah, I think no, that's well. Could you maybe give us some examples of? I think it'd be curious for people to know just exactly what the Education and Public Programs Department, like your department, consists of at the gallery, and the different people working to different ends. And maybe you could give an example of just what that means at the gallery, and some projects you're particularly interested in or proud of. This is pre-COVID, because we're going to talk about things that have happened and had to be adjusted, but maybe things that have happened in the past that have resonated.
Sure. Well, like in terms of the department, we've got, just in terms of the structure of the department, we have a manager of youth and school programs. So Natalie really focuses on overseeing all of our offer for schools, whether that's here on site, or virtually, like through webinars and through national outreach. And again, family programs. Families are an audience that we work hard to serve and to attract, because art galleries aren't always top of mind. We're in a city with the History Museum, the Agriculture Museum, other places that are more hands-on and probably kind of viewed as kid-friendly. So we want to serve that audience. We have educators who conceive, plan, and develop programs for particular audiences, be it adults, schools, specific audiences with special needs. And we have an educator whose mandate is specifically to do outreach to local Indigenous communities and to really help Indigenous and non-Indigenous people learn about the contribution of Indigenous artists in the history of art, in this land and around the world. And to understand the ideas that are that are being talked about in those. So we have people who plan programs, and then we have a really dynamic team of people who actually deliver the tours, the interpreters, or essentially tour guides. I think of them as our teachers. They're the frontline folks who, on any given day, give a tour to a group of kids, or what we were kind of saying in the other talk. They might do a VIP tour for for someone all in one day. So
their mandate can be quite broad in any given day. I know.
They have to read their audience and adjust, and kind of understand, what's someone's level of knowledge and what's someone's level of interest, and then kind of what's that starting point, and then how can you help them find ways in. So I mean, that's the composition of the team. I think that the work that we've done in schools has always been very strong, and the fact that we have national reach through our webinars was helpful to us, kind of coming into the current situation with COVID. I know that in the fall when Aberdaughlin opened, that was just a whole gallery effort, gallery wide, but the opening was really great. There was a welcoming ceremony. There were workshops organized with local Indigenous community in connection with Waranango, who's the artist who created the piece that's in the main entrance of the gallery right now. That was really about bringing the artist and local Indigenous communities together and exchanging knowledge. So I think that the examples of best practice in the past have typically been ones where, we might have been actually serving quite a specific audience, and were quite, consulted with the audience ahead of time, and they were sort of involved in the development of the program, so that you kind of, you're not just supplying something kind of ready-made to a group. You're kind of working with an audience to understand their needs and kind of co-develop something. And then typically what will happen is the pedagogy is sound, and other groups can benefit from it. So we've done, programs where we develop verbal description tours for people who are blind or who have low vision, but which are really helpful for anyone to kind of just spend some more time doing some careful looking, which is that very first piece of entering a work, right? It's just looking and sort of describing what you see. So
the special needs programs for the gallery, that's something in my tenure there, I've noticed. I mean, it's something that I know has always been a focus of the gallery. And that you were saying too, specifically after the lockdown and everything, that there was a development of specifically a program for those with dementia, which I think is a community that's been particularly hard hit and isolated in this moment. And you brought that up, something that's been developed for that community.
Yeah, I mean, because I should say our programs for people with special needs have sort of evolved and changed over times, and there are programs that we offered that we don't offer anymore, and there are new ones that come along, and we sort of serve different communities. And actually there's a program called Spark, which happened pre-COVID. Andrea on our team really spearheaded that. But working with the Dementia Society of Ottawa and Renfrew County, during the closure, they reached out to Andrea, and I know that they really wanted some kind of online support, some kind of a product that could still serve their audience. They have people who are living with dementia and their caregivers, and so Andrea produced these slow looking videos, which it's like a 15-minute video where you focus just on one artwork. You can pause the video. You just take your time to really spend time with an artwork. And then, for this particular audience, it can evoke storytelling and, access to memories, and, maybe get participants to engage in conversations that are personally meaningful to them. As we kind of touched on in our previous conversation, I think it's a strategy that can work with many different kinds of audiences. So, there's no reason why that wouldn't work with, viewers who aren't used to looking at art and who are just wanting to practice ways into artwork, or children. I mean, the tone and the language used might be a little bit different, but the strategy of slow looking is one that could be useful for a lot of different reasons in a lot of different ways.
And can you talk a little bit about, it came up with Yornango and Abedakwane, but I mean, I think that this education, I think, is in a sense fraught with many different kind of narratives and paradigms. I mean, I think that old models of education being, quite hierarchical of I'm going to teach you something and you're going to learn, these are being, I think, there's evolutions of these, of the way we think about education. And I think community and access is a huge part of present dialogues. And I know it happened with the example that you gave with Yornango. I'm wondering from the perspective of your department, how you're engaging with kind of different models of maybe bringing in and making space available to share and to learn on maybe ways that aren't traditionally, thought of how it would just be a kind of top-down approach, but maybe chipping away at those models a little bit.
Yeah, and I should say, I mean that I think it's sort of it's an age-old sort of debate, like on what is the nature of learning and what's the nature of reality. And I mean, there are, certainly when I went to school, which is, I like to think not that long ago, but is kind of long ago. The idea, I think really that, you sit in your desk in rows, there's content, you're sort of an empty vessel, you receive information. It's, the approach is didactic and expository, and, kids are, tabula rasa, they're a blank slate and you can kind of write stuff on them. Schools, museums, certainly for the past 15, 20 years, longer in some cases, have really been sort of more grounded in constructivist learning theory, which basically means that, the idea is that knowledge is constructed. It's made by the learner. So we all make our own knowledge, and it's really grounded in our time, in our lived experience. And that's not to say that it's just absolute relativism. I mean, things have to sort of have an internal logic. We all kind of, and there are many things that we can agree on that, we sort of say are, the same. But, we always sort of see things from our own perspective. And so, where that comes into art, for example, is, I like, the example of, even an exhibition of historical art, that was produced, whatever, 500 years ago, and may have been intended to sort of do something or say something at the time, and may have been read in a certain way, in a certain context in that place and time, can be viewed today by people in a different part of the planet and in a much different time, and just understood in new ways. And so hence sort of the provisional sort of nature of the interpretation of an artwork. So I think that learning, in museums, certainly the practice is really grounded in that kind of constructivist learning theory. So in terms of working with communities, I mean, there's COVID, there's also Black Lives Matter, which, has happened. And I think those have really kind of made, sort of, at least for me, kind of made me really kind of rethink and re-question and kind of go back to maybe some of those basic kind of ideas or tenets into the theory of learning, and to kind of think about, well, so how do you create a good learning experience? How do you reach new audiences? And I think that outreach is important. I think it's important to think about, well, so who are we serving and what are their needs? And there's a lot of research in the museum field around that. There, John Falk has done a lot of studies around, or did an extensive study on what are the motivations for visitors to visit museums. They might come because they want to facilitate an experience for a child, or they might want to come because they're a content expert, and so what they need is different. But what about people who don't come? And so thinking about how, I guess, to collaborate with communities, everything from, consulting with them to co-creating with them, and there's a spectrum. And I think that institutions have to kind of understand where they're comfortable being on that spectrum. And that might change depending on the audience and the topic. So
right. Yeah.
I think that's a really general answer to your question, but that's...
No, I just know that from working also curators on, the major exhibitions that we do, and that education is a key component, the program around that. And I know the dialogues are quite active these days about what would complement, if you're showing a European painter, for example, what are the active dialogues now that we might think about how we could engage with that work, in ways that are topical? So I think that there's very active discussions, and also, as you said, often with the programs that education offers, it's not simply like your colleagues in education are just going out there and building something. It really is involving the entire institution in many cases, from curators to design to, with your Nango facilities and planning management, to make a space conducive to this work. And what was going on outside, I mean, it was incredible just to be able to move outside on the plaza and use it for a way that I'm sure when the gallery opened, Moija Safdie and others may not have ever envisioned that, you'd be drying and tanning hides on the plaza, and it's quite wonderful. So I wonder if, speaking of, we're coming to a half an hour, those that are coming or do have the chance to come to Ottawa. Last week, when I spoke with Junia in the last House Blend, I asked her to kind of navigate a viewer or a visitor through the gallery and what they might expect when they enter in. I'd like to do the same with you, Gary. If a family or an individual is coming to the museum right now, so inclined, they get through into the colonnade and they're walking up. What is the visitor experience from the point of view of education and the offer at this point in time, with the measures in place at the gallery?
Yeah, well, so if you come, so if a family comes to the gallery, for example, you can come to the Garden Court, which is right near the beginning of the Canadian and Indigenous galleries, just before the chapel with the 40-part motet. And we have interpreters stationed there, and we've got a family art adventure, which was conceived by the team to do the same things that Artissimo did. If people are familiar with Artissimo, it was very hands-on. Kids could wear costumes and take art buddies around. What we've done now is we have kits that we give to people. So you can do a self-guided activity as a parent, where we have sketchbooks, pencils for the kids, and an activity sheet. We're going to order. They were so popular, we had to reorder. So we've got some more coming into our kits that propose simple games you can do in the gallery, like looking games, looking at a painting for a couple seconds, 30 seconds, then turning around and sketching as many details as you can remember, then kind of going back and looking at what you remembered and what you left out. Or strike a pose, like everyone takes the pose of a character in the painting. Just ways to keep kids moving and active and learning in ways that are minds-on, that are hands-on, without touching the art. Yeah. But that are engaging and fun. And for adults who come, they can also find an interpreter in the Garden Court. And right now we're doing ad hoc interpretation. So rather than having groups of people who maybe don't know each other, who aren't in the same social circle or bubble, kind of come together for a program, we have limited capacity to just guide people through as they want. So last week it was just really a lot of questions about, well, what is available, what's on offer? And then there were some folks who had questions about artworks, and we can spend time with people doing what we talked about, just kind of maybe giving them strategies to empower them to kind of look on their own, or to have conversations with the people that they're with to interpret artwork.
That's great. I'm just, because thanks, Gary. I just was looking up as you finished there. Just wanted to share, this is Clickbait Kimmy. A great professor of mine always started with, all right, what do we see here? And then we apply concepts as they come up. Such an engaging learning experience way to apply information. So that's a comment. And then also, Gary, from Monique. Hi, Monique. I have a teen very interested in art. So what should I bring them to see that would blow their mind, Gary?
Well, for sure. I mean, they should come. They can come, and by the way, they can come with their own sketchbook if they like. And you're allowed to sketch in the galleries, and we checked, you're allowed to sketch in Aberdaughney as well. And I would get them to explore. There's the artworks in the public spaces, which are amazing, and I want to kind of highlight Tepkick because that's going to be up for, I guess, the rest of August.
By Jordan Bennett,
By Jordan Bennett, and he came to the gallery and talked about the piece. Really amazing. I would for sure visit Aberdaughney, but I'd encourage you to maybe kind of explore some of those side galleries with little there are gems kind of everywhere throughout the gallery, and maybe just come and the challenge I would throw down is try and sketch two things that you really like and one thing that you really don't like, and maybe think about
Hmm.
why in each of those cases.
Hmm. I like that.
Yeah, it's easy to do, and then maybe get friends to do it, then compare notes.
Yeah, and see, I just it made me think a lot of what you're saying. We have a colleague, Gary, who, as partner, teaches business at Carleton University, and I know that he brings his class in just to come, and a lot of they're business students, and he brings them to the gallery, and they have to write a report on something that they've seen and how they engaged with it. And I think it's sort of an ice breaking of thinking creatively outside of your field and your discipline, because I think anytime I've talked to Serge, our colleague, it's I think there's mixed reactions, but I kind of love the idea of just yeah. And for me, the drawing idea, I teach a course in Venice with the University of Ottawa every second year with the biennial, and we with their MFA students and some fourth years, and we go into the museums. I mean, you're in Venice, and we get them to draw similar to what you're saying, but I don't draw. I don't have a visual arts an applied background. I'm an art historian and a writer, and so I participate anyways, and it's a different way of looking, because I do what I can with and it's so important, because it just is that reminder of almost getting back to that slow looking idea that you were saying.
Drawing is really great, and you don't even have to show it to anybody. And I mean, if you don't want to draw, I mean, take your camera and take some pictures. I mean, do what you feel comfortable doing. But I just think that, again, it always kind of goes back to, like, what's your starting point? Where are you? And what's your reaction? And I think that I've experienced it myself. I mean, when you use some of these strategies to kind of decode or to interpret, like, a particularly difficult kind of work of art, that there's sort of a feeling of, it's like doing a puzzle. And then this kind of feeling of satisfaction. It's not like there's a beginning, middle, and an end. I mean, you can spend a lot of time, a little bit of time, but just kind of hearing someone else's perspective, even if you're with a friend or a family member, and just interpreting together. Basically, I can say with complete straight face that every time I've toured groups through the gallery and looked at familiar works, there will always be someone who notices something or makes a comment
Yeah.
about it that makes me look at something in a new way that I never would have considered on my own. And so these works become enriched, like, each time you look at them.
That's great. And sorry, I feel like we're getting to that. I'm just thinking of things as we're talking, but I think it's a big question, though, isn't it, about this, because I think it crosses maybe between education and curatorial, like when you're asked about what does something mean, or this idea that, an artwork, whether it's a Renaissance painting or something contemporary, that the expectation is you come in, it's in front of you, and you have to get that one thing that it's trying to tell you, or if it's an abstract painting or something, like, what does it mean? And it's a vexing question. And, a Montreal artist, Michel DeBoy, had an opening at a gallery nearby within the last year or so. And he said he was asked that question by a journalist, and I loved his answer of saying, it was a work of his, and he works anyways. It was based on old subway cars in Montreal, and the doors would open. It was an engaged, like, a work that you could actually interact with, and he said, that's a very tricky question. Why don't people ask it about walking through a park? And I said, and it was interesting, because he said, that's, when people are walking through a park, they're getting an experience, they're looking around, they don't ask, what does this mean? They just take in the experience, and they just kind of enjoy it, and maybe they do it again, and they see something different. And it stayed with me when Michelle mentioned that, because I kind of love that answer of just, like, allowing something and saying, you don't have to get, this kind of, all up about you're not getting it, because it's just there as an experience that you wouldn't ask maybe in other situations what something means. It seems particular to an art object right there in front of your perception, so just
Yeah,
wanted to share that too.
that's a good example. And I think that it'll mean different things to different people at different times. Some artists would say that there is a very specific meaning that I'm trying to convey. And if they've done their job well, people will understand. We look at with a lot of groups we've gone through, we've looked at historical paintings that have narrative content. The group doesn't know that particular period of history, but they can read what's happening in the painting, and basically decode the story that's being told. They might not have the names of the people, they may, but the core, the core of what the story that's being told is something that they have access to. So really, I think people are a lot more capable of interpreting art and appreciating art than maybe they think if they're new to visiting art galleries.
No, and it sounds like there's a lot of support there for those that come to the gallery and want that. And I wanted to ask Gary one last thing before we wrap it up. And thank you for this conversation. What do you think in terms of, you've been at home, you're still at home, I see, not quite returned to the gallery, even though the public has. And I'm at home, obviously, for the next little while. But what do you think the takeaways are? I mean, this has been a challenging period. It's been a period that certainly you've had to rethink some programs. Are there any takeaways, though, that may be positive out of this in terms of thinking of maybe, things that you now realize being shut down and in lockdown, shut out and in lockdown, that maybe there were things that weren't working before that you're now realizing, oh, that's something we want to maybe hold on to as we get back into whatever the world will be, down the line?
Yeah, I think certainly in terms of like digital kind of engagement, like, programs like House Blend, for example, or the Saturday spotlight tours that we do, those programs help us reach audiences that we wouldn't otherwise reach. So I think that there are some virtual programs that we do on platforms like Instagram, which are very easy and very simple. And so we can maybe let go of the polish a little bit. And sort of, offer programming that will reach, have far greater reach than, on-site programming normally would. That's not to say that on-site programming isn't important. I think there's always really important to kind of be in front of the actual object, but we can kind of get more reach. And I think that just in thinking about the whole thing has sort of made me sort of realize that, I think like a lot of people, things are possible, and maybe things are, I won't say easier, but they are more possible than we think. And if we are willing to take some risks that we maybe weren't willing to take before, we can do new things. And for example, lectures moving forward, it may be a while before we can have a large number of people in our auditorium, but we've all seen Zoom conferences, and there are ways of talking to people all over the world. And kind of engaging in conversations that are difficult to make happen in, real, in one space and one time. So I think that a lot of, many things have opened up.
Do you see then? Yeah, that I think that's very, and I'd like to wrap things up on that positive note, Gary. You could see maybe a blend then of because I think everything's going to be virtual, and we will be announcing, I think, a lot more content this fall online, Zoom, that sort of thing, talks. And maybe that might be something that doesn't go away. I feel like, it's there. And I think that just outside of the gallery as well, just in general, that, that might be just a bigger facet of how we also bring in to engage in real life with objects and each other.
Yeah. And all of these initiatives help us just think about what are the communities who we're trying to reach? How can we be useful and relevant? And just keep on thinking about those things. And I think it's an ongoing conversation. It's an ongoing process that just, keeps on going.
Great. Well, I look forward to keeping on going with you, Gary. There we go. When we meet again at the gallery or wherever whenever that happens. Hopefully it won't be too long, but at least for the audiences and those who can make the trip, the gallery is open, and that's wonderful to see. And we're all excited about that. So thank you, Gary, for joining us on this edition of House Blend. Really appreciate your time. And thank you to everybody who joined us this week. And please, August 6th will be the next House Blend. We're just confirming, but I think it's going to be a good one with the guest we're hoping to confirm shortly. So stay tuned. We'll announce it. And thank you, everyone, again, for being here. Bye, Gary.
Bye.
Bye.